Okay, well, welcome. Today we're going to be interviewing Aldrin Bogi, the director of YWAM Bangalore. Welcome, Aldrin.
Thank you.
And we have with us our studio audience, the School of Ministry Development. So, welcome everyone. Aldrin, I'd like to ask you our first question here. Our first question is a pretty broad question. And these questions come from our studio audience, and they're very good, by the way. What is the main key that has helped you to be a success in ministry?
Wow, that's a good question, actually. I think I do not know if I'm successful yet. Not sure how you define success. Different people define success differently. I think some people tend to define success by what you see in terms of the results in your ministry. For pastors, it could be, okay, if I have a church of 100 people, I should make it to a church of 500 people. So that's the criteria of success. But I think the question needs to be altered a little bit, because we need to be understanding that we live in a culture which is very success-driven culture. So we define everything from failure versus success. And it is coming up as a big pressure to those who are in ministry. Now, when I was new in ministry, I want to be successful in my ministry. So I still want to be successful in what I do. But I have to remind myself all the time, what is really God's definition of success? And I think if you read the Bible carefully, God's definition of success is being faithful to God. The most successful people in the Bible are the most faithful to God. And because some people came to Jesus, in Jesus' description of the end times, he says, many of you will come to me and tell me about all your successes. Lord, Lord, did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not prophesy? Did we not do miracles in your name? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evil doers. So I think this whole notion of how are we driven in our ministry? Are we driven by the desire to achieve things in our lives? Where does our significance come from? Does our significance come from our ministry results? If that is so, then that is equally wrong. The results that we see in our ministry should be a byproduct of us being faithful to God. And this knowledge, this understanding is progressive. I did not know this for many years of my life. And if you don't know this truth, and usually these truths cannot be learned in a lecture, it has to be learned in life experiences. And if you don't wrestle and experience this truth as an experiential knowledge, then you will also become a part of the rat race that is there in the ministry itself, where everybody is trying to outdo everybody else. And I used to talk a lot about legacy in my messages in the past, leave a legacy behind. But I'm learning that it's a very pagan notion. Leaving a legacy behind sounds very spiritual, but it's all about us. It's all about my achievement. It's all about, what I can do in ministry. It's all about what results I can offer to the world. It's really about, I'm trying to find significance in the work that I do and in the results it brings forth. But if you read Hebrews 11, it's a whole chapter dedicated to the heroes of faith. And many of these people, actually all of them, they never came close to the vision God gave them. Do you see what I'm saying? Abraham, he was promised a promised land, but never got into it. But yet he was considered a hero of faith. He was applauded by God because of his faithfulness. So I would say those who are faithful are successful, right? You can have a church of 10,000 people and not be faithful. And for God, being faithful is more important than having a lot of success in your ministry. So I guess I would question you with a question. What is your definition of success? Is it similar to the world's definition of success? And if it is, then you'll feel like you're failing all the time. But if your definition of success is God's definition, which is to be faithful, then your results doesn't really matter. It's your relationship with God that will take you long in your life. And I think that's becoming an inspirational truth for me, not to be driven, but be led by the Holy Spirit. Not to be driven by an external target, but to be led by the Holy Spirit to do things that God is asking me to do, right? And leave the results to Him. And when the results come, we will all rejoice. I mean, there's nothing wrong in having a bigger church, nothing wrong in having more success in your targets, but that is not what should give us significance. That's what I'm trying to say. So I hope this is...
Yeah, good. Here's another question for you. How do you connect with other ministry leaders, maintaining relationships, good relationships with other ministry leaders?
Ministry is all about relationships. You know, I think we need to understand, if you are a student group of School of Ministry Development, I think I shared that in the very first week of your school. We drew the relationship pyramid, remember? We said how many of the people know you, do not know you, love you, and really find a value in your relationship with them. Ministry is really about relationships. And so you and I need to make every effort to keep relationships right? So how do I do that in my life? Well, it's different, because the goal of life is not to have all the 1 billion people in the world become your best friends, because that's not possible, that's not realistic. The goal is not to, you cannot have many deep friends. It's just not possible. You can have many deep friends, but the goal is not to have tons and tons and tons of friends in your close circles. And sometimes I know that some people struggle, especially young people of your generation. I know they struggle if they don't receive an SMS for quite some time, if they don't receive an inbox message in your Facebook. They feel like nobody loves them. It's easy to say, oh, nobody loves me. And we tend to look at our Facebook and say, oh, this guy has 3,900, friends on his friends list. He must be very popular, but that's not true even in real life, not just in virtual. That's not.
We look at you.
Yeah. So I have like 3,900. Some of the people, I don't have a deep friendship with them. For some people, I don't know them. They may have heard me speak in a camp, or they may have heard me speak in a conference. They add me. I kind of remember them. I add them in, and then I forget about them because we're not in touch with them. So how do we do relationships in real life? What do I try to do? And I'm not perfect in this. I'm growing in my own understanding. I think you have to keep your priorities right. There are 4 pillars of relationships, I think, crucial to any relationship, whether it's formal or personal. By formal, I mean relationships with your colleagues, relationships with your leaders, and relationships with those that are reporting to you. Those are formal relationships. Your boss, your colleagues, and your subordinates. But there are personal relationships with your spouse, if you're married, your brothers and sisters, your parents, your uncles and aunts, your nephews and nieces. But also there are those who are in between, the church around you, the Christian leaders around you, those that are official but not formal. You know what I mean? And I think these pillars of relationship will help you whatever you're talking about. And I think the first 2 is love and respect. Mutual love and mutual respect. Relationship takes at least 2 people or more. You cannot have just one person in a relationship. It is minimum 2 people. So all these principles are mutual. So if I'm friendly with, say, a colleague of mine, then I have to love him or her the way Christ would love. Right? And if there's mutual love there, there is the possibility of growth in that relationship. Mutual love and mutual respect. There are no options for those who are following Christ here. Christ doesn't say love only those who are good to you, or respect only those who are rich, or respect those who are educated, or respect those who are fair in their skin. Respect and love, there are no options. Right? We respect everyone, we love everyone. But the rest of the last two pillars of relationships takes effort, takes time, takes energy, takes work. And that is where most of the time we are not giving enough attention. Right? Those are trust building exercises and understanding the other person. Right? Stephen Covey says, seek to understand than to be understood. It's always good to understand the other person. The more and understanding doesn't come when you shake your sleeves. Oh, I understand David Bogi. It doesn't work like that, right? What do you think we require to understand a person? Time. We need to spend time with the person. We need to understand what he or she is going through in life. Trust is not automatic. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, trust one another. Right? Do I trust everybody in ministry? I don't. Is it a sin not to trust people? Well, it's not, because the Bible doesn't say, thou shalt trust your neighbor. It doesn't say that, right? But it says you shall love your neighbors, respect one another. But trust is work, right? If you constantly prove yourself untrustworthy, then people will not trust you. If I'm always lying, the result of that is people will not trust my words. Are you with me here? So how do I relate with other Christian leaders, other people? Well, I have to work in my capacity to love and respect. And that is usually to do with my worldview. Because, whether you like it or not, we all profile people. Oh, he must be proud. Oh, look at her. She's dressed up so in a fancy manner. She's rich and she's proud. Or she's arrogant. We put people in a box. Actually, we don't even know them, but we start putting them in a box. Do you see what I'm saying? So love and respect usually is something to do with our worldview. And we have to tackle that. We have to assume the best of the person when we don't know them. You understand? We have to learn to love even our enemies. And that's hard. Right? We have to learn to respect humanity. And those two principles will greatly help you. And when you get to know them, focus on yourself. Focus on becoming a trustworthy person. Focus on becoming an understanding person. And when you walk a trustworthy life, you will be surrounded with trustworthy people as well. Liars usually are always surrounded by liars. Gossipers are always with gossipers. You understand? And that's a general principle in life. So if you cultivate this exercise of, Jesus said, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. If you cultivate that principle in life, people will say, I can trust this guy because he says what he says he would do. He comes on time or he delivers. And you begin to set your standards, and those standards becomes your benchmark, and those benchmark defines the kind of friends you will have, the kind of colleagues you will have. Do you see what I'm saying? And I would say that the pillar of love, respect, trust, and understanding are secrets of forming good relationships. Yeah.
Here's a follow-up question for that is, how do you have a good relationship with a ministry co-worker or a ministry leader who doesn't seem to like you?
Right. That is hard. That is hard. Relationships are not always easy simply because we live in an imperfect world, right? Now, while it is true that there are hard people, there could be hard people in your own ministry teams, it is also true that you could be one of them to somebody else. So it's not just about another person being hard, but perhaps you are hard. Perhaps I'm hard. Perhaps I'm difficult for someone else to work with. And my wife usually quotes this, I don't know from where she got it, but she quotes this often in her sayings. She says, 3 laws of change. You know, law number 1, you cannot change others. Law number 2, the second law of change, you can change yourself. Third law of change, when others see you change, they will change as well. And I think in relationship with your teammates or in your own ministry team, especially when you begin to address the idea or when you begin to entertain the idea that perhaps this person doesn't like me, then you're already starting with a mental block. You're already starting on the wrong foot. You may have reasons to believe that, but have you verified those reasons? Most people don't. Most people assume that the other person doesn't like them because there are perceptions. Remember, in my teaching I taught you about fact versus perception. Perception is I feel cold today. But David might say, he's from another part of the world where it's very cold. He'll say, I feel warm today. But I'm saying it's cold because that's my perception. But fact is, it's 21 degrees Celsius today. Right? Fact is true for an American and for an Indian at the same time. But perception changes everything because perception is the interpretation of what you saw or you were told. Right? So many times when we have difficulties with people who are close to us, it's because perhaps perception is leading the way, right? So the first step is always, when you find that somebody is very difficult to work with, the first step always is to go to God and say, God, this is how I feel about this person. I'm really struggling with this person. Would you please give me grace? Would you give me understanding of how to deal with? Because, you know, relationships are key to ministry. If relationships are broken, the Holy Spirit is not present in that place. Many people misquote this verse where it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, there I am in their midst. Many people think just because we are 2 or 3 physical numbers, God is there. Of course, God is everywhere. That's true. But that particular verse in Matthew talks about the context of reconciliation. When 2 people get right with one another, when they get right in the company of 2 or 3 people with one another, there God's presence is there. You understand? It's in the context of reconciliation. So the Bible in the very same passage says, if you think someone has a problem, go to that person. Leave your gift at the altar. Go to the person and talk to the person. Don't carry your perception assuming that the person is bad. Find out what the reason is. Tell the person, hey, you know what, can I talk to you about some things which are bothering me? And focus on yourself more than attacking the person. I'm learning in my own life, in my own leadership to say that I feel like this. You know, this is how I feel. And I'm just telling you that this is how I feel. I just want to ask you, is this really what you meant? Because I'm struggling with this, right? And the person will have an opportunity to explain to you, oh, you know what, that's not what I meant. No, that's not what I meant. But if you're already in deep, in roots of bitterness, then you're not listening to the person. You're saying, no, you told me like that. You are bad. You're always gossiping against me, right? And you're already assuming on notes of perception. So then it's hard to cultivate good relationships, right? In my ministry life, which is about 24 years now, I have had a number of times when I have entertained thoughts of perception and my relationships only became more shallower. You understand? Or even cut off. But by God's grace, I'm learning to go to the person and telling the person, can I talk to you, please? And I say, the goal of this conversation is to reconcile, not to prove myself right or prove you wrong. The goal is to get right, right? It's not easy, but it takes humility, right? So those are to do with difficult relationships that are already being experienced. But how do you maintain good and healthy relationship? I think, especially in ministry, you need to learn to understand the principle of boundaries, right? Boundaries. We all are different. We're different in our personalities. We're different in our taste. We're different in our, cultures. We are different in our giftings. And the other person that you're trying to relate with is totally different from you. And there has to be a healthy boundary that needs to be set apart. Even for me and my wife, Vicky and me, we need to establish healthy boundaries. And the secret is, how do you find space in your closeness? On one hand, God expects us to be close, to have good relationships. On the other hand, we are individuals who are different from the other, right? So I have to give enough room for the other person to function in the manner he or she has been created. And the other person has to learn to give me that room to be myself in my own, in my own life. And usually misunderstanding comes when boundaries are loose. Misunderstandings comes when we don't know how to celebrate our differences. Misunderstanding comes when we take one another for granted. Misunderstanding comes when we don't understand roles and expectations from one another. You understand? And in ministries like we are involved in YWAM, where everybody lives in a community, it's very easy, because you're all living so close to one another, that there's hardly any room for exercising, the psychological boundaries, right? And you need to learn to do that in life. So I would say these principles of the four principles I already spoke about, but the principle of cultivating this culture of boundary, where you respect the other person's boundary, then when you respect the other person's boundary, the other person will respect your boundaries as well. And always, this is like underlined, repeated principle. Always assume the best of the other person, especially when you don't know all the facts, right? Don't assume, oh, he must be wrong, he must be bad. Assume the best, especially when you don't know the facts. And if you're hearing some rumors, they're not facts, they're rumors. So make an attempt to go to the person instead of going to 15 other people and only strengthening your bitterness. Go to the person straight. And when you go to the person, don't go with anger. Go with a composed mind, composed heart, and focus on how you feel rather than saying, you made me feel like that. You understand? Focus on yourself. And the other person will know that you're not attacking, you're only clarifying, right? Those are some of the principles that I would, give. And, there are many books written. I can think of the love languages. It's not just for husbands and wives or girlfriends and boyfriends. It's for, I guess that you can use that for relationships across the board. I mean, my wife always says the ones who give gifts a lot usually are the ones who are also expecting gifts in return. Not because their identity is coming from there, but they really value giving gifts to people. You know, we have this girl who used to be our staff. Some of you will know her if I tell the name. And you know, she's such like she's so aware of dates. She knows my birthday. She knows my wife's birthday. She knows my children's birthdays. She knows our wedding anniversary. And if someone is coming from her state into Bangalore, she's sending us a gift. On my birthday, somehow she finds a way to send me a gift. You know, sometimes I forget certain things, but then I get a gift from her, right? So when we went to Nagaland this time, we made sure we packed a little gift for her. Because people like this appreciate, that's their love language, by giving gifts. So understand your colleagues, you know, emotional language, and be generous. If someone loves gifts, try to give them a gift. You don't have to buy them a huge, expensive gift, but they will value even if you buy them a notebook. Hey, I was in a shop, I saw this notebook, reminded me of you. I think when I saw the design, I thought that you might like it. I just picked it up for you. Cost you 25 rupees, but it gained you a friend who's come closer to you by a few more notes. Do you see what I'm saying? Learn that habit. Learn to cultivate relationships. Yeah? And you will never go wrong. The more good relationships you have, the more greater the impact of your ministry will be. Yeah.
Yeah, good. We'll go to another area. As far as calling, of course, we know that a big chunk of your ministry is to youth, discipling, mentoring, teaching. How did you get this calling? Is it something you got as a child, or is it something you acquired? How did you find your calling?
Right. I think there's a tremendous misunderstanding out there in the subject of calling. So much so that there is a need for people to write articles, books, and make it more simplified without losing the truth behind the notion of calling. And I think over the years, as I travel around and do ministry, this is something that keeps on coming back in more than one different way. Differently, people ask different questions, but it kind of points to the same kind of question. Over the years, I'm learning very clearly, more so now than before, is there are two kinds of calling God calls us to. Right? There are two kinds of calling God calls us to. The foundational, primary calling is really to Himself. Let's call that primary calling. Right? So there is no mystery here. There is no secret here. God is not hiding it under a sofa somewhere and making it difficult for you to understand. You know, He calls us to Himself. Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus told His disciples, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. He called people to follow Him. So your number one primary calling always is to follow Christ. Right? So that's easy. That's pretty easy. And you should never, ever confuse calling with your vocation. Vocation is a platform in which you exercise your calling. Your calling is to love God, to know God, to enjoy God, to come closer to Him, to worship Him in truth and in spirit. That is not going to change for the rest of your life in eternity. You will keep on worshiping God in truth and in spirit. So that's your primary calling. Your secondary calling is your vocation. Vocation is what you do with a few combination of things that God has deposited in your life. What are some of the things God has deposited you with? God has deposited with you in you natural talents. You were born with natural talents. When you became a follower of Christ, God has deposited in you spiritual gifts. Right? That the Bible talks about. There are more than 27 to 30 gifts the Bible talks about. There could be more. God is still inventing new spiritual gifts, I believe. So he's still a creative God, so he can give you brand new gifts for this 21st century. Then God has deposited in you skills and knowledge that you have acquired over a period of time. You did your bachelor's or your master's, or you went to a theological institute, or you went to YWAM, or you went to a particular dance school, or you went to graphic designing course, or you went to an engineering college. So you have your primary calling, which is to God, and your secondary calling are built on the deposits that God has deposited you with. He's given you natural talent, He has given you spiritual gifts, and He's given you knowledge over a period of time through both your relational experiences you've had with people in life and your educational knowledge that you've acquired over a period of time. And your vocational platform is usually built on these three things. Did you see what I'm saying? And when you are on your vocation, on that platform, you are exercising your primary calling, which is to know God and to enjoy Him forever. My vocational calling is to be a youth with a mission staff. You understand? Because YWAM to me for the last 21 years has given me the platform to make best use of my natural talent, my spiritual talent, and my acquired knowledge over a period of time. YWAM is giving me the platform, but my calling is not to YWAM. Do you see the difference? My calling is to God. And your vocations may change a number of times in your life, but your calling will never change. Right? So how did I know my calling in terms of what I'm doing as far as ministry role is concerned? Is that the question that you wanted me to address? Like, how did I know that in my own life? Well, I did not know what I just told you. I did not know until late in my life. So it was a struggle for me to understand what do I really do in my life. I was pursuing my diploma in civil engineering. I was a good student. I gained good marks in my entrance exams. But then I began to see that what I'm enjoying the most was taking Bible studies, preaching in small youth fellowships, going to an organization, helping them with volunteer roles, going to my church and helping my pastor. That gave me tremendous joy in my life. And I was going to college, but I'm also going and doing all this volunteer work for organizations and church. And in my own neighborhood, I was very active in ministry when I was very young, right? And I began to realize that, wow, I have these talents that God has given me. And so my own journey is quite unique to me, but nevertheless, it's my story, so let me share that with you. So when I was 19 years old, one of the organizations asked me if I could pray about becoming their board member. Now, at age 19, to be a board member of an international organization, at that time, that organization was doing extremely well. For the chairman to come and ask me to be on the board was quite, I was quite nervous about that. But I took it as a privilege and I said yes. I don't remember whether I prayed or not, but I may have prayed. But I said yes. I was the youngest board member, 19. You know, and all these bank officers and, you know, government officers and big business people and big pastors were sitting there, and most of the time I was quiet, but I was learning from them, right? And that organization had about 100 or over 100 volunteers like myself. And my role was to represent the volunteers in the board. That was my main role. And this organization had many volunteers, but only one staff, one full-time staff. And that full-time staff met with an accident. And his parents were very worried about him. And he was in a major accident. So he left that city and went away back to his hometown. And so we were back to square one. We didn't have a staff, a full-time staff. That's when our chairman said, let's pray and ask God to send us a new worker, a new Christian worker. So we prayed and we prayed and we prayed as board members. And one of the days, this chairman said, let's all fast and pray. So all of us were in our respective homes, fasting and praying. And I was fasting and praying in my own house. And when I felt like the Lord told me, Aldrin, you are the answer to your prayers. So I went to my parents, spoke to them. They were concerned for me. And I went to the chairman, spoke to him. He was like, are you sure? Because in my family, 3 people already were in ministry by that time. And I'm the youngest. So when you're the youngest, people are concerned for you more, right? Because they're thinking like maybe you're emotionally making a decision. So by God's grace, I gave them time. I gave myself time. So I did not jump into that decision immediately, right? I finished my education. I worked in a company for about 9 months, and this notion of calling was very strong in terms of working in a particular ministry. And so finally, I resigned becoming a board member, and I joined the very organization on which I was a board member. And that was a process of about 1 year. So for 1 year, I did not make a decision. I sort of took time with my parents, with my pastor, with my friends. And I joined Youth for Christ, which is a Christian organization. And I became their staff. And at that time, I didn't know the difference between primary calling and secondary calling. I thought my calling was Youth for Christ. Then even when I joined YWAM, I thought my calling was YWAM. So today I find it extremely, what do you say, I wouldn't say sad, but I see this frequently in my life. People say, oh, I'm not called to YWAM, I'm called to my church. And I have to gently correct them that your calling is only to Christ. No one else and nothing else, right? But your vocational platform, you need to decide which platform suits you the most. Which platform will help you to know God more? Which platform will make best use of your natural talent, your spiritual gifts, and your acquired knowledge? Right? Which platform will help you to enjoy God and the things that God wants you to do? That becomes your vocational platform. If engineering, becoming an engineer in a particular factory will be that platform, so be it. Go there, become an engineer. But don't forget your primary calling is not to make money. Your primary calling is to know God and to love God, right? You can never make your primary calling anything other than Christ. You understand? And now, can I take a couple of minutes more?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Now, vocations can keep changing. Our vocational platform can keep changing, right? So I used to be in Youth for Christ, and there was a process in which change took place, and I prayed, and God led me to Youth with a Mission. And I was in Youth with a Mission in Pune for 14 years, and there was a process in which God led me to Bangalore, right? So my vocational platform from YFC changed to vocational platform in YWAM Pune. It changed to vocational platform in YWAM Bangalore. Within YWAM Bangalore, I used to be the leader of the 1628 ministries. That changed. I became the leader of University of the Nations. That changed. Now I'm the leader of the base. Your jobs may keep changing, but your relationship, your calling to Christ never changes, right? So that's why I tell all my staff, what do you mean you're called to, DTS, or you're called to worship? They don't understand. Most people don't understand. You're not called to DTS. You're not called to worship ministry. You're called to Christ, right? You're always only called to Christ. And if you're strong in your relationship with Christ, it doesn't matter what you do. Your ministry will be impactful. That's what I'm learning, and I'm beginning to write articles to this effect. And I think we need to write books and things like that. Of course, there's a tremendous need because there's a lot of confusion out there, right? And we think that going into business is less spiritual but working in ministry is more spiritual. But nothing can be wrong from that, right? But again, going into business with the primary motive of making money can also be wrong. And coming into ministry with the primary motive of making your ministry big can also be wrong. Both has to have the centrality of Christ, in your lives. One of the things Vicky and I are praying right now is business. That's why I'm going to this Business as Missions conference in Chiang Mai in Thailand next year. The Lord, I feel, is leading us to business. We want to start a business. But in all of the last 1 year, as we are talking about business, we are not entering into business to make money. That's not our primary motive. That's not, we are saying, God, we want a vocational platform that will help us to know you more, to tap into our talents and spiritual gifts, and make use of our acquired knowledge over a period of time and our acquired relationships over a period of time to connect all the dots and to make a platform so strong that out of that platform we will live out our primary calling. And so, as some of you know, that we have become health freaks in the last 4 to 5 months. We are compromising on some of our principles in the last 2-3 weeks, but we are coming back to shape again. And one of the things we are seeing is when I go out to Kamanahalli or when I go out to MG Road for a restaurant, Vicky and I, with our family, want to go out. We don't see any healthy restaurant options available at all. There's no restaurant that is designed to deliver a product that is healthy for food, for people, right? Because most business people out there are running restaurants because they want to make more money. So if you're surrounded by in a nation where everybody is trying to do a business only because they want to make more money, naturally they'll cheat you. You pay them 200 rupees, they'll give you only 100 rupees worth services. And you feel cheated at the end of the time, right? So we are talking about a restaurant business which will provide goods and services to promote the concept of health. So money is not the primary motive. Do you see what I'm saying? The passion is to how do we provide food to people so that their lives are healthy. A byproduct of that could be making money. Do you see the difference? And so I think that is something that is related. It's a long answer to your question, but always tell yourself this: when you're confused, you probably are confused because you're actually asking the question, what work should I be doing? Your work is not your calling. You understand? Your calling is to Christ. Your work only enhances that exercise, that experience of knowing Christ. If God calls you to be an engineer, be the best engineer you can be with your hands.
Now, as you're going through life, how do you know that you're in line with your calling? How does a person tell? Because some people you probably have seen don't seem to be in their calling. How does a person know if they're on the right track?
Right, like I said, like these 3 things needs to make sense. See, the talents that God has given you are your first indicators of your vocational calling, right? So I would say this. I would say this as, your relational calling, your vocational calling. Those are the 2 ways I would distinguish it. Your relational calling is very clear, right? It's to Christ, primarily to Christ. But your work or your vocational calling, how do you know that? Well, keep on asking, what am I doing today? Like, the thing that I'm doing today, does it champion my natural talent, my spiritual gifts, and my knowledge? If there's somebody who is trained to be a great mathematician, right, and his talents are not being used in ministry, then I think we are just ignoring the amount of deposits God has deposited in that person. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think everything that we do in our lives will give us back something. So there's nothing that will go wasted in that sense, right? Like I worked in an organization for 4 years before I moved on to Youth of the Mission. Not everything in the organization was perfect. You know, not everything is perfect in Youth of the Mission. But today, I can truly say some of the leadership principles we know that are coming out of ministry are way more better than the leadership principles MBA students learn sitting in a fancy college. You know why? Because we learned it from real life experience. So nothing will go wasted in your life. So I would say always keep these two things in the way it's supposed to be. Primary calling is always number one. Whatever you do, your primary calling is to Christ. Your vocational calling, you're constantly saying, okay, this is my job description given to me by my leaders in your workplace. How can I be the best in my work culture? Right? And if you want to be the best in your work culture, then you say, Lord, help me to pull out my natural talent. Help me to pull out my spiritual gifts. Help me to pull out all the lessons I learned in my undergraduate programs and my graduate programs, right? And use that to the maximum, and help me to pull out all my relational contacts I have with people, left, right, center, and how do I deliver my work to the best of my ability. Your attitude towards work needs to change. So when you fulfill that job, for let's say you gave a commitment for 2 years, if you faithfully fulfill that job in the 2 years that you have given, God will lead you very naturally and spiritually to the next step. He will show you the way. If that platform is no longer suited for you, if God thinks you have to enlarge your territory, He will open your doors to the next platform. You know, Sam Dharam and I, David, were spending time with him, and Sam was trying to track my own leadership experience over the years. You know, when I first joined in ministry, I was not a leader, as in I didn't have a position, right? But I had some influence over people. Then I got transferred to another city. Then my experience of positional leadership and influence, as in leadership, expanded to a few more people. Then I joined YWAM. I was just a staff with no titles, right? Slowly I got a title. And when you delivered, when you began to take your job seriously, how do you take your job seriously? Use your talents, use your spiritual gifts, use your knowledge, and be faithful, right? Then your leaders will see, oh wow, this guy is really faithful in the small works we gave him. Let's give him a bigger title. And slowly, promotions kept coming along the way. Both God and people are involved in the promotions of life. So what happened slowly, I was responsible for just one person, then I became responsible for 3 people, then I became responsible for 10 people, then I became responsible for 20 people, then, you know, I became responsible for a larger number of people today, right? Because what I learned in these years is to be faithful in your work. Now, does it mean that I was always faithful? No. I have failed many, many times. I was lazy many times. I wasn't using my spiritual gifts to the best of its capacity. That's why Paul says to Timothy, fan into the gifts that has been given to you when I laid my hands and prayed over you. Fan into flame the gifts that are already there in you. And I believe that we need to see many people do that. Usually what happens in today's world is the grass is always greener on the other side. But you don't realize the person on the other side is looking at you and thinking your grass is greener than his grass. So when you leave this and go there, you soon find that, hey, this grass also is brown. And you'll find another grass greener. So what people are doing today in ministry is they're jumping from place to place and they're never satisfied. I meet them after 10 years. They've changed 5 vocational platforms and they're still not very satisfied. The problem is them, not the platform, right? They have never given the best for that time that they were staff. Do you see what I'm saying? And the ones who don't give the best will never be able to progress in life, even if they change 10 different times. You understand? So if you give your commitment to some place, learn to exercise all that you know about your talents, about your gifts, and about your job description, about your knowledge, and make use of all the relationship. And in doing so, God will give you new knowledge. When you make use of the old knowledge, God will give you the new knowledge. And when the new knowledge comes, you will suddenly find that my knowledge base has increased, my talents have been refined, I've discovered new talents in the process, I have seen new spiritual gifts emerging in my life, and this particular structure to me is becoming too small. And then you will say, I need a bigger role, I need a bigger platform. And God will then put you. Soon a leader might come to you, or a pastor might come to you, or an opportunity may come to you and say, would you pray? I've been watching you, you're an amazing guy. Would you pray about becoming the director of whatever? Or team leader of this team, because I've seen how you do this in the last 3 years, or the last 4 years. You know then you know God is leading you to move into that direction. Don't make this process very spiritual. What I mean by that is, don't make it unnecessarily spiritual. Don't say, God, give me a word, give me a sign, give me a scripture. That's okay, you can do that. But also think about your natural talent, your spiritual gifts, and your acquired knowledge, and all the relationships you've built over a period of time. Right? And then ask yourself, is what I'm doing right now doing justice to all these things? That will greatly help you in your life. Right? Now, last night we were spending time with somebody, and they were telling us about how they feel like they need to take a time off from ministry. And one of the things I told them, timing is very, very important in ministry. Timing is what? Very important in ministry. Learning to understand kairos. In the Bible, there's chronos and kairos. Chronos means chronological. The word chronology comes out of the word chronos. It's 9 o'clock now, it's 10 o'clock later, then 11 o'clock, But kairos is God's time, God's opportune time. Sometimes some people are so full of themselves, and when you're full of yourself, you feel discouraged very easily. Because you're always focusing on the grass that is green on the other turf, that you're never paying attention to the turf on this side. And you're always making plans of what you will do in the future, and that future never comes, because you're not doing anything about the present that you're already involved with. So these guys who came to us yesterday are doing great in their present, but they're feeling a little discouraged about their present. So they're trying to find their answers by saying, we want to do this in the future. And my wife and I both, without even discussing, because we didn't know what they were telling us, both of us had the same piece of advice for them. We said, you know what, guys, your time is so ripe. We feel like you guys are just coming up in your leadership. And if you start doing something totally different, you're losing the momentum. Do you see what I'm saying? And believe it or not, if you lose the momentum, you come back all the way to back to square one. Because just when you're about to enter into a territory where your expansion takes place, you're moving away from that. Because you're allowing discouragement to discourage you. So timing is very important. Do you see what I'm saying? And if you stick with God all the way till the end, God will never put you to shame. God will never dishonor you and your commitment. He will always expand your vocational platform, right? And so be faithful to God, but be sensitive to the deposits that God has given to you. And keep using them. And as you keep using them, you will understand God's will for your next step, right? Don't ever ask God's will for the next step if you're not doing God's will in the step that you've taken already in your life. Yeah.
Okay, so could you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by make this process unnecessarily spiritual, saying, God, give me a word or give me a sign.
Right. I think every truthful reality has a pseudo false reality, right? Everything, there is a duplicate of everything that is real, right? So there is true spirituality versus false spirituality. Now, there is a book written by Francis Schaeffer called True Spirituality. I have a copy of that, of his book, True Spirituality. I think most people, when they say don't be too spiritual, I think they mean don't be too religious. You understand? Don't be too religious. Is being spiritual wrong? No, I don't think so. I'll elaborate a little bit more. I have a way of saying this. I always tell people, be spiritually natural and naturally spiritual. You understand? You don't have to make other people feel guilty. Because, if you read Matthew 5, 6 and 7, you can get your true understanding of true spirituality. You understand? Matthew 5 talks a lot about true spirituality. Matthew 6, talks about, let's see that. Matthew 5 gives you a beautiful understanding of all those beatitudes, the true spirituality, right? And then Matthew 6 talks about self-righteousness. Don't do your acts of righteousness in front of others, for others to see. It's all about self, the dangers of self-righteousness, right? And Matthew 7 are the dangers of false righteousness. Don't judge others, and true versus false prophets. When I say don't make the process unnecessarily spiritual, what I'm basically saying is you don't have to not use, right? Because sometimes we only want spiritual insights for everything, that we fail to use our logical reasoning. If you read the Bible, like if you read Paul's journey, in Paul, many times in his letters he says, I think it was necessary for me to send to you this particular brother. He said, I think. But also, he has an experience where he saw a Macedonian vision, a man calling him to come to that particular city. Do you understand? Which is more spiritual? I feel both are equally spiritual, right? And so what I'm saying is, don't make the process so religious that you're missing the point, right? Especially if you're from South Asia, even if you're from Malaysia, you're from an Indian origin, the spirituality of Asians are usually very mystical, very mysterious, very isolated, very unconnected to logic and rationalism. I'm not saying rationalism, but rational processes. The spirituality of the Western world is very rational, very logical. Both are valid expressions of God's giftings given to different communities, but both can be hindrances to understanding. By this, all will know that you're my disciples when you love one another, right? So in identifying or understanding God's will and God's steps for you, for your seasons of life, don't be so religious that you're not able to hear God, right? But reason with God. Say, God, this is what you gave me. You gave me the gift of preaching. You gave me the gift of teaching. You gave me the gift of prophecy. You gave me the gift of, crafts. You gave me the gift of engineering. Naturally, with my hands, I do so many things. I see that I have a natural talent for that. And I see that this opportunity that's coming to me matches with my giftings. What do you think about it? Would you give me a confirmation about it? So you're doing a process of reasoning with God, but you're still giving God the room to speak to you. Because sometimes God does surprise you by saying, no, you might be trained in the University of Egypt, but I want to use you in the deserts, like he did with Moses. But eventually, Moses' learnings came to use. Because to lead, I don't know how many million people were there, I forget the exact population. Some scholars have, it is a large population that Moses was leading out of Egypt. His university education did make a difference in understanding, and when he was not wise, his father-in-law helped him to become a little bit more planned in the way to lead this masses of people, right? And then there was this guy who never went to university, became the Prime Minister of Egypt. From University of Desert, he was leading the whole nation of Egypt. So God has his own way of breaking those equations. But allow God to do that. You don't manufacture that, right? I was pursuing my studies in civil engineering, but I don't build buildings today. Is it valid to be a civil engineer and still love God? Absolutely. I know many civil engineers who still practice civil engineering, but they love Jesus as well. But for me, God specifically put me because we needed a full-time worker. The scripture that came to me was that the harvest is plenty, the laborers are few. And when we were praying for the laborers, God told me, you are the answer to your own prayers. You're already enjoying preaching. You're already enjoying teaching. I used to get excited more about going to a meeting than going to my classes. You understand? There was a sense of fulfillment that I had in my life. And so I followed that. And it was natural for my parents to be concerned in the beginning. Right? So they sort of came to a point where they released me, but they were still not sure what I was doing. So if they were setting up a wedding date of my brother, they would not consult with me because, they didn't see my work as important. They thought that it's okay, we can just tell him the wedding is on the 9th of March, just come. And I have to stop everything I'm doing here and then go there. Right? It took a time for them to accept what I was doing as a valid work. Even though they loved the Lord, they did not take me fully for serious. But I had to prove it to my family. They were not demanding proofs, but that's the way it was subtly working. But as I kept being faithful to God and my calling, then now they realize, oh my goodness, he's got a life of his own. What he's doing is valid work. Yes, one of the siblings is working in a proper company with a good salary. So am I. So his schedules are important, so is my schedule is important. Right? So we come to a point where we value one another equally same. In fact, I travel more than my sibling who works in a proper company. I live in a bigger house than the sibling that is working. I'm not comparing, I'm just saying God has his own ways of doing things, right? So, but don't make the exercise so spiritual that you're attacking everybody else and saying, no, you don't understand, God is telling me this, you don't read the Bible, I read the Bible, All those are false spirituality, right? If you're truly spiritual, the fruit of that will be love, joy, peace, kindness, long-suffering, patience. That's the mark of a spiritual person. Not arrogance, not pride, not self-righteousness or false righteousness. Do you see the difference? Does it help you understand?
Yes, thank you.
So it's very important that you do that. And I think we have our own cultural understanding of what it means to be spiritual. You can't laugh too much. You can't, we think that if you're very serious, you're more spiritual. No. Those are all wrong notions of spirituality. That's why you need to ask yourself, are you really, again, the same thing like true success versus worldly success. God's success is faithfulness. So what is God's spirituality? Right? Not man's spirituality, not your denominational spirituality. What is God's spirituality? What is Paul's spirituality? Now, Peter, in Galatians, Paul had to confront Apostle Peter because Peter was trying to agree and compromise on the standard of circumcision because he was under the pressure from the Jewish world. Because they were saying, okay, fine, Jesus is okay, but you still need to be circumcised in order to be accepted by God. And Peter was sort of downplaying that, and Paul confronts him publicly for all of us to read for the rest of history. He says, how can you start with Christ and end up with flesh? Right? And new creation is what counts. It's not circumcision or no circumcision. What counts, Paul says, is your life. New creation is love, joy, peace, kindness, patience, long-suffering, and all that. Right? That is true spirituality. Right?